Good morning and hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone participating in the 2026 Nonprofit State of the Union Resilience Redefined Nonprofits in a Time of Transformation. This has become an annual tradition for us here at GRF, and we're excited to share some timely nonprofit insights for the year ahead. Quick. My name is Amy Bolin. I am a partner and the Director of Audit and Assurance here at GRF. Today, I am joined by a wonderful lineup of GRF's audit, tax, accounting technology, and risk advisory experts. We also have a wonderful guest speaker joining us today. Maya Ajmera, the President and CEO of Society for Science, has graciously offered her time to be with us and participate in the fireside chat at the end of the presentation. So be sure and stay tuned for that. Thank you all for being here. We have a lot of great information to share with you today. Now for the housekeeping. Go back. There we go. There are 2 CPE credits available for today, and I'm sure you all probably know the drill, but there will be a short survey that will appear automatically following the webinar. In addition, to obtain that CPE credit, please participate in each of the polling questions throughout the session, as we will be able to gauge your active participation that way. Please note this webinar is not intended as financial or legal advice. This is simply for educational purposes. Sorry, the slides are taking a little longer. There we go. So we are GRF CPAs and advisors based out of Bethesda, Maryland, serving clients in the DMV as well as nationally and internationally. Our firm serves a wide range of clients covering not-for-profits, for-profits, government contractors, and others. However, our particular niche is within the non-for-profit INGO space. This year, in 2026, we are excited to celebrate our 45th year anniversary. So we are very, very proud of this exciting accomplishment. But before we get started, I would like to recognize GRF's newest partner, Lisa Heller. Lisa Heller is an outstanding teammate here at the firm. She is succeeding Dick LaCastro as our new Director of Nonprofit Tax. Thank you, Lisa and Dick, for all of your hard work. So as you can see today, we have a very full agenda. But before we dive in, I would be remiss not to pause and acknowledge the broader environment many of you are operating in right now. Nonprofits are navigating an unusually complex moment. We're seeing heightened uncertainty driven by shifting policy priorities, evolving regulatory and funding landscapes, global instability, and continued economic pressures. Many organizations are managing funding disruptions, increased scrutiny, rising costs, workforce challenges, and growing demand for services, and often all of this at once. For those with federal funding or international operations, recent developments have added another layer of ambiguity and concern. We know this uncertainty can make planning difficult. Our team is actively monitoring developments that may impact the nonprofit sector, and we remain committed to keeping our clients informed as clarity emerges. One thing we continue to see, however, is the power of community. Working with more than 850 nonprofit organizations, we're hearing similar questions and challenges across the sector, and we believe there is real value in creating a space to share insights, experiences, and practical strategies. With that, I'd like to bring in Melissa Musser. She is the partner and director of our risk and advisory services to discuss our newly released 2026 Top Risks Report, which is now available on our website. Melissa, take it away.
Wow, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. So I'm Melissa Musser, partner and director of risk and advisory services. I'm a CPA, certified internal auditor, certified information technology professional, and a certified information system auditor. If y'all know me, I love all things risk. I can't shake your hand today, but would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me, a connection or email me or whatever. I will talk your ear off on risk and strategy. So I manage the department So we do a lot of enterprise risk management. I actually believe, and that we are the best in enterprise risk management. Check out our website, check out our resources. There's a lot of confusion on what enterprise risk management is, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit. But we also do internal audit, fraud and forensics, cybersecurity, all those amazing things that now CPA firms do. I know a few years ago, folks were like CPA firms for cyber, but no, no, we have some of the best folks ever. So we are here to support you in these risks that y'all have. And so we have been doing this top risk report for quite a while now. So you can see some of the other preceding ones. You can score us, right? Because it's like a whole crystal ball. Like, what are we expecting to see? And I have to say, we've done a pretty excellent job in forecasting these risks. You will get a copy of this report. Please take a look and give us your thoughts on that. It's really your one-stop shop for risks because in the appendix, we know a lot other organizations do top risk reports. So we have put a lot of those in the appendix. A lot of those come out in the fall. So we've tried to gather as much information as we can. The difference with our report is that we really synthesize it through the lens of our clients, right? And we operate in the DC metro region. So we were looking at it through that lens. We thought that would be somewhat helpful for you because we work with so many of y'all. And we wanted to really customize this to really help you. So one of the most important things to be thinking about when you think about risks, right? Is how it's connected to your strategy. So, and this is one of the things I like to point out about what is enterprise risk management, right? A lot of times you'll hear that word, and I'll hear a lot of folks use it incorrectly. So sometimes folks are really just talking about risk management, but they'll use the term enterprise risk management. And so just to clue you in on that, when enterprise risk management only and every time deals with strategy. If you're doing risk management and you're not thinking through the lens of strategy, you're just doing traditional risk management. Traditional risk management is fantastic, right? But enterprise risk management thinks of things through the lens of your strategy. Basically, you are on offense, not defense. You're doing traditional risk management, that's defensive, that's great. You're doing enterprise risk management, that's offensive, that's your strategy. So, for example, a lot of folks do their strategic plans, what, like say every 3 years, some every 5 years, some maybe don't even do them. That's okay. And so, this is where enterprise risk management comes in because you get together, you synthesize what are our top, let's say, 3 to 5 risks. That's it. That affect our strategy. Like that would affect us achieving our objectives. That would completely derail us, like lack of funding, for example, different things like that. What is the biggest thing? Talent management, possibly, right? So we report that then out to the board, or, maybe it's the audit committee. Traditionally in nonprofits, it's, 70%. It's the audit committee. It's typically only the top 3 to 5 risks. And we talk about how that affects our strategy and if we need to pivot our strategy. And you see how enterprise risk management and strategy are very related. And in this world where risks are operating very fast, it is very important to be able to do that. So you'll find all of that kind of great information in our report. I just remind you to look at it through the lens of your strategy when you're looking at this. The other thing is if, let's say, for example, I'm with your board of directors, or maybe I'm with your leadership team. And if I were to interview all of them and I'd say, what are your 3 objectives for the year? Hopefully everyone's on the same page. Or that's your first risk, right? That's your number one risk. People they don't even know what the organization's goals and objectives are, right? That's a problem. Let's say everybody agrees, everybody knows, right? So then I go around and ask your board or maybe your leadership team, what are the 3 biggest risks that are going to disrupt or cause you not to achieve your objectives? And I'm meeting with folks and everyone's giving me a different answer. That's not good, right? We got to have consensus. How do you get that consensus? That's actually part of enterprise risk management. When the first time I heard about enterprise risk management, they say it changes the culture. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. What do you mean it changes the culture of the organization? But that's the example because not only are we aligned on our strategy, but we are aligned on the biggest risks to that. And then you start to see the magic happening. Everyone's speaking the same language. It's everybody wants a seat at the table because they understand it's not the risk table, it's the strategy table. So if everyone is on the same page, they may say, you know what? Number one, talent. We need the best talent. Okay, so that's your biggest risk. We address that in the report. There's a lot of strategies on how to invest in that. But that really, if it really is the number one thing, then you really need to put the effort into it. And maybe, it's cyber. Maybe it's cybersecurity. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Some organizations their systems can be down for a month and they're fine. Other ones, one day they're cooked, right? So we have to really understand what is significant to us, not just someone's opinion, but really look at what is significant to our organization and then invest. If cybersecurity really is, you can flip that risk on its head and turn it into an asset where people and donors, organizations, they want to give you their data because they trust you. It is now your strategic imperative. Now, if cybersecurity is a really top risk, I would expect to see that investment. When I feel like if I look at your trial balance, I look at your financials, I would expect to see you investing there instead of just rolling over every year, not just talking the talk, but really investing. So that's when we start to see, risk-based budgeting or risk-based reserves. Maybe you put that into your reserve calculations, certain elements of your risk or certain things you need to invest in. So you see how it all starts to trickle down through the organization when you start to do enterprise risk management. I definitely get very excited about this, and I could go on literally for the entire session for 2 hours. I know y'all don't probably want to hear that. If you do, certainly follow me on LinkedIn and you can get more of my awesome talks or whatnot. But you know what? I'm going to turn it over now to two members of our awesome team to talk a little bit about some of these risks. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Tom Brown, who he's not here today, but he worked really hard on this top risk report. So great job, Tom. And I am now going to turn it over to Mac and Alex.
Thanks so much, Melissa and Amy. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. Really excited to talk from you all and hear from you all. Please feel free to use that chat function to ask questions and interact throughout. And as Melissa said, please feel free to connect afterwards to keep the conversation going. But my name's Mac Lillard. I'm a principal in our Risk and Advisory Services department, and I support Melissa on all of our risk and advisory services pillars, but I really prioritize and focus my time and attention on our internal audit practice and our fraud forensics and valuation practice. And I am joined today by my colleague, Alex McNeil.
Thank you, Mac, and welcome everyone to the session today. My name is Alex McNeil. I'm an advisor in our ERM and ESG services line within the Risk and Advisory Services team. My background is in international nonprofit leadership as a chief operations officer. So really enjoy that piece of, turning theory into practice, and looking forward to digging into that with you all today.
All right, so just to kind of set the stage a little bit. We wanted to talk about strategic drift, and that's one of the areas that we talk about a lot in our top risk report. Strategic drift, it doesn't happen just because management or the board takes their eye off the ball, right? Or they're not paying attention. It happens as a result of the organization changing faster than the governance model does. And this is a result of innumerable macro and micro factors. As we all know, this year brought unprecedented uncertainty, regulatory changes, and probably most devastatingly, funding cuts for many organizations. And as a result, nonprofits were forced to be reactive, which resulted in significant changes to governance structure and models. But as we can see at the top of the slide here, governance or proper governance isn't reactive, but it's anticipatory and proactive. It relies on evaluating the impact of past events, assessing and understanding the current state of the organization in its entirety, not just focusing on the financial position or the IT infrastructure or our human capital and talent management, some of which we're going to talk all about today. But it's really about understanding the current state of all of these if different areas to paint a comprehensive picture of where we are so that we can strategically plan where we want to be in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 to 10 years into the future so that we can reasonably predict the risks and issues that may prevent us from getting there so that we can develop mitigating plans, adjust, adapt, and execute on our strategic priorities. So governance gaps often appear during times of rapid growth or contraction. And as we know, over the last year, there has been unprecedented contraction. And this unfortunately followed a period of about 5 to 10 years where there was relatively sizable or significant growth within the nonprofit industry as the prior administration had actually allocated more and more funding to supporting public programs, nonprofits, and INGOs. So as a result of this growth over a 5 to 10 year period, followed by rapid contraction, this forced shortcuts and unfortunately informal processes and stopgaps in order to just respond to the changing environment. When this happens, policies, procedures typically aren't updated to reflect the current practices, which creates even more risk when we deal with key individual turnover, whether it's in executive management, board turnover, or just a lot of individuals leaving the organization across multiple different levels. Either way, governance then tends to lag operational reality. And we're also faced with new financial challenges as a result of these lost funding cuts. And we have to consider potentially new strategies that we've never even considered before, like a merger or acquisition with another nonprofit organization. Another area that causes or exacerbates, some of these challenges related to governance gaps is role centralization versus decentralization. So as I talked about, over the last 5 to 10 years before 2025, there was pretty significant growth within the nonprofit INGO association community. And as a result of that, decentralization is very common within organizations because it can support scale as the organizations grow, create new offices, chapters, expand service offerings. But this requires clearer accountabilities, clearer controls, and standardization across the different regions when possible. And in these situations, the effect of turnover is then amplified because it creates inconsistency across the regions or chapters. For example, one country or one region or one chapter may lose a finance director, the other an IT specialist, and another a regional director or an executive director. The remaining employees are then left to divvy up that workload or engage third parties to cover the gaps, and this creates further inconsistencies within roles and responsibilities. Combine that with a lack of documentation, and you're left with an organization that is, substantially different than what it was just 12 months ago. So then we can factor in key employee turnover in the pursuit of new revenue models, which brings in new compliance requirements, key performance indicator tracking. And again, we end up with a substantially different organization than we started the year off with. So this drift occurs when the structure and operations change, but oversight expectations, or the way leaders oversee, monitor, and hold the organization accountable, stays stuck or aligned with the old setup. But now I'll kick things over to Alex to talk a little bit about how we can identify the strategic drift.
Thanks, Mac. So, as we've alluded to, strategic drift can happen quickly in response to external signals, such as the unfortunate funding cuts during 2015. And this is typically done during a crisis and aimed at survival of the organization and their impactful programs. However, when we move from crisis mode back to the new normal, it's important to reassess the decisions that were made to ensure the organization is still moving in the right strategic direction. Strategic drift can also happen over time, quietly and unintentionally in the background as accumulation of smaller decisions. This can sometimes be more concerning since leadership teams and boards may not be aware of these shifts immediately and can find themselves moving in an unintended direction without the means or with contractual obligations that push them away from their intended mission or strategy. Either way, both are important, and it's essential to identify potential triggers of strategic drift early and put strong governance in place to be intentional and proactive when these triggers occur. Some of these triggers on the nonprofit and NGO side may be related to misaligned program expansion or contraction prioritizing donor requirements over a strategy. So obviously there's a fine line in a resource-constrained environment, so having clear guidance for leadership and boards is important. We often hear from our clients that taking the wrong project led to more long-term organizational problems than if they had decided not to proceed in the first place. External shocks causing donor-driven priority shifts. So while assessing strategic alignment post-crisis is important, what's more important is having controls in place prior that can support leaders in the decision-making process to determine if they're willing and or able to shift with their donors or if alternative funding sources are required. Another one is poorly planned mergers or partnerships, as Mac mentioned. So we've seen a lot of this over the last year in the sector. And even if these mergers and partnerships are planned well, they are inherently complicated. So ensuring strategy and mission are part of the decision-making process throughout the journey is essential. And finally, over-reliance on a single major funder, obviously front of mind for a lot of people in the room. If that funder's priorities shift, you may not be in a position to stay true to the strategy. On the association side, some areas that we're seeing around strategic drift can be driven by new revenue models and diversification of membership bases. These shifting revenue models, as the external environment changes, can be necessary. However, aligning those with the strategy and member expectations is vitally important. Related to that can be product or service expansions aimed at offsetting declining dues or event revenues. So we see associations trying to offer alternative ways to engage with members, which it's important to ensure that this is done intentionally with the long term in mind, and also considering how this might impact existing members if they don't see this as true to the mission. And finally, pressure to respond quickly to industry-wide disruptions. This is similar to what I've mentioned for nonprofits. And it's really important to have a governance model in place to support that rapid decision making instead of trying to make those decisions on the run. Oh, too many slides. One back. All right. So what can we do to limit strategic drift? We see governance as the guardrails that drive us toward our North Star. By having effective governance in place, we can give teams the room to move ahead quickly, while leadership and boards are confident that the right limits and triggers are in place to raise issues when needed. So a few opportunities and mitigations that can be put in place are a dynamic and right-sized enterprise risk management program that Melissa mentioned earlier. This connects strategy, funding decisions, and risk appetite. This does not have to be a heavy lift, and you don't have to hire more staff with the right size program. It can be managed within your existing team. It's really important that it's built into current processes and creates efficiencies and oversight. The second is around mission alignment or project scorecards. Some of you may know these as go or no-go scorecards. They take into consideration strategy alignment, risk appetite, contract structure and requirements, financial position, organizational capabilities, reputational considerations, and can provide guidance and transparency for decision making, but also keeping kind of a paper trail of, why did we make that decision at that period in time. Thirdly, we have board-led oversight in mission alignment during major market or funding shifts. So ensuring the board is engaged early can make sure there's another stakeholder in the room to ask the right questions. Scenario planning is also another effective tool. So this can start with our traditional financial scenario planning, but can also be expanded to test assumptions of the strategy and asking the question, what happens if our assumptions are wrong? Post-mortem exercises can also be useful, where you imagine the strategy was not achieved and work with the team backwards to identify potential triggers. And finally, on technology governance, impacts to systems and data can have huge financial implications and distract from essential day-to-day delivery. Effective technology governance can preempt this and keep our eye on the strategy at the same time. As we've already mentioned, cybersecurity and business continuity are among some of the top risks we've identified for 2026. So I'll hand back over to Mac to delve more into technology governance.
All right, thank you, Alex. All right, so as Alex was saying, every top risk report we see, whether it's our own, the Institute of Internal Auditors, Pulse of Internal Audit, the NC State Executive Perspectives on Top Risk, all of these reports have IT, cybersecurity, and then business continuity or operational resilience at the top, meaning like somewhere in the top 10. Unfortunately, what we see in practice is that sometimes organizations can be reluctant or even just a little delayed in responding to these risks. And again, this isn't because anybody's, taking their eye off the prize or they disagree with the report findings, but because these initiatives often are very resource intensive and they conflict with the other priorities. Oop, I think we've got a poll question that just launched. But yes, they conflict with other priorities at a time where you're pivoting and trying to figure out how can we continue to deliver on our mission or meet the needs of our members or our constituents, our programmatic personnel. Um, and unfortunately, there are some common misconceptions, specifically as it relates to information technology and cybersecurity. So a couple of these we've got listed on the slide here, but these include the belief that maybe we're too small of an organization or we don't really have any sensitive data that anybody would bother to steal from us. But the reality is that if you have employees, if you have donors, customers, members, then you have data that is worth pursuit by a cyber criminal. So addressing significant IT or cybersecurity risks or building in operational resilience, again, we know it can be costly, but it's often not as costly as the financial or reputational impacts of a breach or other significant risk event. So a couple of key questions that you as governance or management, executive leadership, programmatic personnel that you should be asking is, do we understand what our critical systems and our critical data is? Do we have a comprehensive listing of all of the systems and platforms that we're leveraging, what data is held in there, and what the overall level of sensitivity is? How quickly could we recover if systems went down? If our CRM system goes down, is that going to impact our ability for the next 3 days to deliver on our mission, or can that be down for a few days without significant impact? Whereas if our ERP system goes down or our communication channels go down, that could significantly impact our ability to communicate with our team members or deliver on our mission. And lastly, who owns incident response? Is it executive leadership? Is it IT? Or is it the board? Generally speaking, it's probably going to be a blend of these different groups. But business continuity planning is really expanding beyond maybe what we thought 10, 20 years ago, where we just focus on like a natural disaster or a snowstorm like we had in the DMV a few days ago, disrupting, our ability to get to the office. It goes well beyond to essentially any major risk event, whether that be a IT and cybersecurity breach, supply chain disruption that lots of organizations experienced during the COVID pandemic, or key employee turnover and staffing shortages, which I'm going to kick things back over to Alex to talk about a little bit as it relates to talent management and management of the organizational culture.
Thanks, Mac. Building on that topic around business continuity, talent management, culture, and organizational governance are more important than ever due to the pace of change and upheaval in the sector. Driven by funding cuts and decreased resources, teams are being asked to do more with less. This puts culture, governance, and leadership behavior under stress and can drive turnover, burnout, compliance failures, mission disruption, and unethical behavior. Ultimately, it's leading towards operational fragility. What we're seeing is a confluence of talent strategy challenges combined with employee expectations, which are increasingly informed by a desire for strong ethical governance, meaningful commitment to sustainable values, transparency in leadership decision-making, performance-driven but inclusive culture, authentic mission orientation, and community impact. Boards and leadership teams play a role in setting expectations for culture, monitoring talent risks, and ensuring alignment between organizational values, leadership behaviors, and strategic goals. What we're also seeing is that there's an opportunity to find new talent. As funding cuts and organizational closures reshape the landscape, a significant pool of skilled professionals is entering the job market. This shift creates both risk and opportunity. While talent shortages remain a concern, organizations that act strategically can attract high caliber individuals seeking stability and purpose-driven work. By leveraging this moment, organizations can strengthen their workforce, reinforce culture, and ensure continuity in mission delivery. Some ways that we're seeing this done effectively are by embedding stakeholder value principles into talent strategy. This takes a stakeholder-centric approach in which employees, clients, partners, and community are treated as key stakeholders rather than just recipients of HR initiatives. This allows integration of important stakeholder value commitments into the employer brand. This could be things like environmental stewardship, strong governance, ethical leadership, and community impact and engagement. Once you've identified these value commitments, ensure that progress is communicated transparently and recognize where gaps remain between the stated values and the actual practices, and be clear about how the organization is planning to fill those gaps. This will drive your brand and competitive advantage when it comes to finding, engaging, and retaining top talent. Secondly, engaging effectively with employees and broader stakeholders can often be easier said than done, so using effective frameworks can help. One example is a double materiality assessment. These are traditionally linked to ESG initiatives. However, they can be an effective tool to balance stakeholder interests alongside financial interests of the organization. This supports prioritization of investments where employee expectations and organizational impact and value overlap. This will drive the organization's commitment to sustainable values. By listening to employees, organizations can build their employee value proposition beyond salary alone, especially important when resources are limited. These differentiators should be informed by the stakeholder engagement exercises I just mentioned, and could be things such as flexible and remote work, robust PTO and wellness programs, professional development budgets, sustainability initiatives within the organization, community involvement and volunteer programs, and leading edge digital capabilities. And finally, make sure you communicate everything you're doing effectively. This can be done by expanding your impact reports beyond mission achievement to also include how you're engaging and supporting your broader stakeholders. People reading those impact reports will very much appreciate that broadened scope. So I'll hand back over to Mac now to finish off.
All right, thank you again, Alex. So I know, when we talk about risks, it can be a lot of doom and gloom. So we wanted to kind of wrap our section up by talking about, what the most resilient nonprofits do differently. One of the benefits of going through a year like we just had is that there's a lot of really valuable lessons learned. And as Melissa talked about in her opening statements, we always like to see how we can translate a risk into an opportunity, or at least a lesson learned. So it's important. I'm going to go from right to left on some of these important aspects of what resilient nonprofits are doing. But starting with diversification of revenue streams and donor base, it's really important to be intentional about how we diversify our revenue streams or how we reach new donors, because we want to ensure that, again, we're not creating this strategic drift, or that we're opening the door to new compliance requirements with which we can't comply, or that take away from our core tenets as nonprofits. Another thing that resilient or effective and efficient nonprofits are doing is that they are continuously evaluating not only management, but the board's capabilities to address gaps in skills, knowledge, and expertise. And most importantly, I see Matt Dupree, you had a question about, how we can minimize the risk during times of transition within the chat. One of the most important aspects about kind of doing this assessment of skills, knowledge, and expertise is actually going through the process of documenting all of the roles, responsibilities, the skills, knowledge, and expertise that these individuals provide to the organization, and identifying their backup so that during a time of transition, you are able to adequately redelegate those responsibilities to the appropriate personnel within the organization based on, again, the remaining skills, knowledge, and expertise after the turnover has occurred. So, when was the last time your organization performed an analysis of all of the capabilities on your board or within your executive leadership team? When you're presented with an audit report or some third-party analysis, is there a board member that has the expertise in this area and can validate the results, ask probing questions, and provide meaningful input into how you use that report and analysis to create value and/or mitigate risk moving forward? This next one I cannot emphasize enough, but resilient nonprofits are technology forward. And yes, I think we've actually avoided using this term for the entirety of our 20 minutes or so here. But yes, this includes the use of artificial intelligence. The most resilient organizations understand the risks associated with artificial intelligence, but they also understand the value of leveraging and implementing AI. And they have a defined strategy as to how they're going to adopt AI technologies, whether you're an early adopter, you're already using it, you're moving fast and breaking things, or if you're a late adopter, meaning you're going to wait to learn from others' experiences and dive in when the time and the resource allocation is right. Again, having a defined strategy as to which one you're going to be and how you're going to implement that is really important. And building on that, does your organization have a defined data strategy that is aligned with your overall strategic objectives? So, for example, if one of your strategic objectives is to grow, what KPIs are you tracking, and do you know which systems to pull those from? Are you even able to pull those from one of your systems? So do you have a system in place to capture the number of new opportunities, donors, customers, or churn, average contribution per donor member, number of events attended per member, to understand where you can improve your revenue generation? These organizations, again, have a defined process for researching, evaluating, and selecting new systems that are going to help in improving operations and collecting data. And what I mean by this is you don't implement a new system or a new AP system just because a board member or a member of the executive leadership team recommended it because they used it at their last organization or their current organization. The process for evaluating and selecting new technologies is intentional and strategic. It aligns with the existing technologies that you're currently using, aligns with the current state of information technology and the desired future state 5 to 10 years down the road. And lastly, they treat governance as an evolving system and are continuously evaluating and improving. So it's not a set it and forget it type exercise, and it's not just a compliance checkbox. So your motto, tenant, objective, or whatever you want to call it for 2026 and moving forward should include something along the lines of adjust, adapt, prioritize, and execute. But with that, again, just wanted to thank everybody for being here. That'll wrap up our section. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, comments afterwards. But with that, I will turn things over to, I believe, Leslie and Mark.
Great. Thanks, Mac. I'll go ahead and get started here. Appreciate the time today. Thanks for everyone joining. So I'll just jump in with some quick introductions. So my name is Mark Tesser. I am an audit principal here with GRF CPAs and Advisors. Been in the audit game for about 18 years now. Majority of that time has, of course, been spent focused on nonprofit organizations. Specifically for myself, I spent a lot of time focused on international NGOs. Lots of experience here in the audit side. And again, we'll be talking a little bit today about reserve policies and just managing in general, just financial instability over the next 15 to 20 minutes here. So with that, Leslie, over to you to go through your intro and the first part of our presentation here.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Thanks everyone for being here today. I really appreciate people taking the time out. I know you're getting CPE for it, so that's probably part of the initiative as well. And I also wanted to thank the last presenters. Thought that was a really good overview of enterprise risk management. I'm going to be honest and say that I wasn't 100% familiar with what an ERM project entailed, but I feel it was a great overview. I feel a lot more comfortable. My name's Leslie Zide. I'm a CPA and I have an MBA, and I'm a principal in our outsourced accounting and advisory services group here at GRF. I've been with GRF only for about a year, but I've worked in outsourced accounting for nonprofits for over 10. And in general, a lot of my experience is in the corporate side with finance and budgeting and treasury services. So overall, over 20 years of experience, and happy to be here today. So I'm going to try and advance a slide, but there we go. So, well, now I've got two. So let's just jump in. Budgeting and forecasting. Budgeting is always a critical part of your recurring finance activities, but if you wait until you are struggling to decide to start focusing on budget and forecasting, unfortunately, you've probably waited too long. This is something that you really need to build into your annual processes. A few hints on budgeting. Make sure you budget to the financial system chart of accounts that you're using to keep it simple, and that way potentially integrate both into one system so that you can monitor your budget compared to actuals. When you're in that budgeting mode, don't just look at the budget as one document. Think about creating scenario planning. I thought it was interesting that I think it was Mac brought this up earlier, that was something you would do on the risk side as well. But if you develop these scenario planning, you will have something to pivot to if things don't go as you expect. And when you have those scenario plannings done, you can pivot seamlessly and potentially with less bias. So from this work, you can create decision triggers. And basically this is saying if X happens, then the org will respond with Y. That will give you something to look back to in case things don't work out as expected. And budgets are rarely perfect throughout the year. So if your budget seems to become obsolete, and again, that's not uncommon, move into forecasting mode. And again, you've got those hopefully scenarios to look back to, and perhaps you can, you've predicted some of these, but perhaps you haven't, but at least you've got those potential scenarios to look back to. And then that, even if your budgets become obsolete in period 1 or 2 of the fiscal year, that's not uncommon because we work with budgets probably 4 periods before the beginning of the fiscal year. So it's not uncommon now, period 2, you're 6 months in. It's not uncommon for that budget to be obsolete. Don't fret about that. Move into forecasting mode. And then don't think of the budget as something that you create, you get it approved by the board, and then you just set it aside. That's not what it's for. What you want to do is make sure that those budgets and forecasts are in your financial system and you're comparing your actual results to the budgets and potentially the budget and the forecast as part of your monthly reporting. Okay. Boy, that is slow. At least on my end. So for real agility, you want to look at your financials and your budget and forecasting at the dimensional level. So don't just develop an overall budget unless you are a really small org and that is just the only way to manage. If you look at your budget and your forecasting at the product, grant, or department margin analysis level, you'll be able to look at profitability. I know that's not a word we use very often in nonprofits, but it's a word that we probably should use a little bit more. And margin analysis to help you with decision making. And again, this goes back to what I mentioned earlier with creating trigger gates. So we know where our self-sustaining products, grants, and departments are, and we know where the ones that are struggling are. And if we need to move to that type of decision making, we have the analysis all ready for us. If you find that that's difficult, and it is, make sure you lean into technology. And again, we haven't used that term, technology forward, but the best organizations are. So we find a lot of our clients are using Martis. Martis gives them a really good balance between detailed budgeting, but not so detailed that the system is untenable and it's just, has a huge learning curve. Martis is a really great balance there. You can use Excel. Everybody, I think at this point has heard about the risks associated with Excel, so I'm not going to mention them all again. A lot of organizations do use Excel, but using a system that will seamlessly link with your accounting system and where you don't have to sort of recreate the basics over and over again, you'll get a lot of bang for your buck that way. Make sure you're getting buy-in throughout the organization. This is really important. We see organizations where the executive director is creating the budget and there's really only 1 or 2 people looking at it. It's really not best practice. Best practice is to get your organization behind it. And I think this also dovetails with some of what the previous presenters were saying, that you want everybody in the organization, or at least your manager levels, to have buy-in with regard to this is where we're going and this is where our strategic focus is, and that's going to be represented in your numbers. And then last but not least, ask for help. There are, in outsourced accounting, I work with outsourced accounting clients, but I also work on a project basis with clients. And there are lots of fractional providers. This isn't just a big plug for GRF, but there are a lot of outsourced and fractional providers that can come in and do project-based work. For us, it's really working with our clients when they need it, where they need it, and it doesn't have to be everything or nothing. And there's a lot of other firms and people out there to help you. So I went really fast because we're a little behind. So I hope I didn't speak too fast, but I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, and just to reiterate that last point there, reaching out to your networks as well, whether it's through your auditor, through your outsourced accountant, whoever it might be, now more than ever, it's so important to sort of get feedback and reach out to your peers. Not to say that we're all in the same boat, but it's always easier when you can, have conversations with folks that have been through, whether it's a new budgeting tool implementation, always good to reach out. I know one of my favorite things to do, even on the audit side, is to connect my clients. When they've got similar issues, it's great to be able to connect them and have them hear directly from peers as opposed to hearing from an auditor or even a consultant trying to sell you something. So take advantage of your networks there. So managing liquidity and reserves. So just want to start by, of course, defining the reserve. So I think there's potentially some misunderstandings when we talk about reserves. There's a polling question that just popped up in case anyone hasn't seen it. But reserves really should be intentional, and funds or net assets that are set aside that have a specific, intention or purpose. Whether it's financial stability, resilience, strategic flexibility. So there's that strategy, word again. We'll come back to that again in a minute. But of course, these are typically designated by the board, and these are not restricted by donors. When we're talking about the reserves of an organization. I think where some of the misconceptions come in, these should not be like excess cash, with no purpose. They shouldn't be like rainy day funds necessarily for emergencies. You don't want to signal to your donors or your readers or your financial statements that you're under investing in your mission or your programs. So again, super important that we define the reserves appropriately and that we're using them, as a tool, not necessarily as a scorecard. So utilizing risk-based reserves and connecting strategy, risk management, reserve policy. So again, a lot of these things that we've talked about already so far, and tying in the reserve aspect of this, we should be setting our reserve levels based on our organizational risk, tolerance. So of course, different organizations are facing different risk profiles. Whether there's revenue concentration, whether we have a reliance on government funding, we all know where that's gone over the last year. Do we have fixed or flexible cost structures? Are we looking to grow programs? Are we looking to sort of pull back on some of our program activities? So again, all just important things to sort of think about when we're developing and sort of tying in our reserves to our strategies. Benchmarking. So the most important thing, with benchmarking is that it should be used to provide context, for the organization, not necessarily, a clear path or an answer like, okay, we benchmarked and we need to do it exactly the same way as this other organization did it, right? So we just need to understand, the overall context, and make sure that we're using the benchmarks appropriately. But really, it should be, the benchmark should be helping boards and leadership just understand and ask better questions about what type of reserves they should be establishing. Some of the more common ones that we see are like months of operating expenses, days of cash on hand, liquidity ratios, again, and those peer comparisons. But again, don't get so hung up on one or two of those. Really, try and tie it back to the risk and see what works best for your organization. Okay, and then just finally on this side, just aligning sort of the long-term reserves again with the potential opportunities and risks. Again, when you're looking at your long-term reserves, you should be factoring things in like program innovation. Are we looking at any strategic partnerships or mergers? Are there any big capital investments coming down the road? Are we scaling any of our initiatives or again, cutting back on any of our program activities anywhere? So again, distinguish between those operating reserves or our short-term liquidity, as well as our strategic reserves or our longer-term sort of opportunity-focused reserves. And again, with all of this, it's not on the slide here, but we've talked about it already on a number of the topics we've discussed. But getting the buy-in, right? Getting buy-in from governance, from management. Important that we are including those individuals in the conversation throughout. So let me advance here. So we thought it would be great to sort of close out or talk about in our little section here, just basically sort of a top 10 of just what we're seeing on the audit side and as well as on the financial statement, disclosure and reporting side when it comes to, reserves and liquidity. So first and foremost is the liquidity disclosures, and Leslie, please feel free to chime in on any of these as I go through. But from the audit perspective, what we're seeing, of course, is organizations becoming a little bit more detailed in their liquidity disclosures. Where as the auditor are also having more conversations, especially in situations where there's been a decline in revenue or where you've had a few years of significant losses. Maybe we're not quite in that going concern territory yet, but we're certainly looking at that and ensuring that organizations are putting this disclosure together properly, that we're including or backing out, I should say, any board designated funds, right? So all the reserves that we just talked about, when you're coming up with your liquidity or your financial assets available over the next year, you should be backing out those board designated funds because in theory, those aren't necessarily available, so to speak, for general expenditures. They need to be approved by the board and should be in line with the purpose that those funds were set up for.
I think the question that clients repeat to us and come to us with is if the liquidity disclosure looks a certain way or gets to a certain point or only shows a certain number of months, does that then trigger any additional language? So can you clarify that?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily, require any language. It's really about, sort of taking a holistic look at the financial statements as a whole, right? So, you may have a really strong liquidity number, but in actuality, you may have this huge grant payable or account payable line on the statement of financial position. So it's really just sort of, individually and sort of organization by organization looking at that. There's no like set, requirement. I know a lot of organizations at one point were like using like a month's available sort of target. Again, fine to sort of internally just have that as a thought or again, a benchmark that you're considering, but not necessarily living or dying by. So, so then jumping into the operating reserves and board designated, obviously we talked about this already. But again, what we're seeing, on the audit and again in the disclosures, we see very commonly that there are reserve policies, but maybe they're not being updated regularly. Maybe we're not actually having the conversation about risk and strategy. We sort of set this reserve policy, way back when, and we've never sort of looked at it or talked about it. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that regularly and having conversations about the current reserve policies and are they aligned with the current risk environment, with our current strategies and long-term strategies. All right, I'm going to keep moving through here, Leslie. We're down to our final few minutes, so I want to make sure we hit all these top 10 issues here. So we already talked about the next one a little bit. The going concern near misses. Again, from an audit perspective, we're certainly looking at this. Again, we have many organizations, especially through 2025, that are unfortunately going to be, getting close to that going concern conversation, right? Again, as I mentioned, maybe you've had 2 or 3 years of significant losses. Maybe you still got, a couple of years of reserves or net asset balances on the books. But what are we looking at? What are we doing to sort of either increase fundraising or how are we just managing sort of the overall expectation going forward and an overall fundraising concerns going forward. So we're definitely having more of these conversations during our audits. So it's important as an organization that you have an understanding of what is our plan. Our auditors are going to most likely be asking about it. We should have a clear, sort of response or plan in place, to be able to have those conversations. Revenue concentrations, donor restrictions. Again, certainly, we're seeing more and more disclosures here. Again, as funding sources are shrinking in some with some organizations, we're seeing more of those concentration of revenue footnotes. And again, those aren't necessarily a bad thing, but it's important that we manage those relationships and that we manage the expectations, with those fundraisers, and that we have again clear plans to mitigate any risks related to any concentrations. Federal funding implications. There's a whole lot. We can have a whole 2-hour session on federal funding implications, but I think the important thing I'd like to just reiterate here from the audit perspective, Obviously, there's been lots of attention on allowable cost, subrecipient monitoring, documentation of those compliance controls. Again, things that have always been looked at, throughout, prior audits. But again, given the restraints and some of the issues that organizations have faced, whether with resources or staffing, there's certainly some potential for some non-compliance to arise, especially for 2025. So again, just having those conversations with the auditor, and preparing for the audit and ensuring that, we've got those controls or other mitigating controls in place, when it comes to those compliance issues. Functional allocation. So again, this has always been a friction point. Again, there's sort of the old school, I'll say, sort of methodology of the different percentages that we're required to have. But again, from an auditor perspective, we want to make sure that there are consistent methodologies in place. We don't want to over rely on estimates that don't have, appropriate documentation. At a very basic level, when we talk about payroll allocations, right, we want to see, those timesheets or those sort of realistic sort of allocation of time based on level of effort, right? So again, those are what we should be sort of driving and basing our functional allocations on. CECL. So the big thing here, let me advance the slide. Keep it simple. So when this first came out, I think a lot of organizations, weren't really sure how to handle it. It was another, one of like 4 ASUs over the last 5 years that had a significant impact on nonprofit organizations. Long story short with this one, keep it simple. It's only affecting those exchange type revenue transactions or instances where, we're essentially extending a credit to a customer or a funder. But again, this wouldn't apply to like your contributions receivable, grants receivable necessarily. But just make sure, again, we've got a good understanding of our historical data, and that we've put together a thorough, analysis here. But again, don't overthink it. Keep it simple, is the big takeaway there. Alternative investments. Again, another area that's just we've seen a lot of focus on, especially in this environment. Again, alternative investments aren't necessarily very liquid. So again, we want to make sure that we're aligning our investment policies with our long-term, again, reserve policies, aligning that up with our liquidity as well. Should we be pulling out of some of these alternative investments to make sure we've got more funds available, more liquid assets, on our statement of financial position.
Yeah, and make sure that you're treating these assets in a way so that they're 100% protected. And if you're not sure how to do that, please get advice on how to do that.
Yeah. And the last two here, I know we're a few minutes over, but the crypto, non-traditional assets, again, very similar to the alternative investments. I think the big thing for me here, make sure we've got a good policy in place around our crypto or our gift acceptance policies, that we're documenting that accordingly. There are some new accounting standards, specifically ASU 2023-08. So make sure you're up to date on that and how we're valuing that on our statement of financial position. And then finally, the last bullet here, again, the big one. I know we've been trying to avoid it, but can't avoid it. It's one thing we gotta make sure we have a pulse on within our organizations is our tech, AI, cyber controls. There's been so much focus on this. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that, we're focusing on all the technology and the AI. We're pulling resources away from our normal sort of standard internal controls that we need to have in place. So again, just make sure that we're keeping an eye on those. We don't want to completely, lose sight of those basic internal controls and those control environment areas that we have within our organizations. Yeah. Anything else to add, Leslie? I know I kind of got through the last few bullets there fairly quickly, but want to make sure we can have plenty of time to get through the rest of the sections here.
No, I think that's pretty thorough. You'll have our email addresses, so please feel free to reach out to us if you need anything. But I think we made up a little time, so that was good.
Awesome. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather and Leo. They're gonna talk a little bit more about the technology and the transformation side of things.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Leslie. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here, perhaps. All right. We'll see if I actually can. Okay, awesome. Thanks again, Mark and Leslie, for that wonderful presentation. And hello, everyone. For those that I've not yet had the pleasure to meet, my name is Heather Broberg, and I'm the Director of Accounting Technology Services here at GRF. I'm joined today by my colleague, Leo Gutierrez. And just for a little background on what Accounting Technology Services does, we specialize in partnering with organizations to select, design, and implement modern, scalable, and efficient finance and accounting technology solution. So today we are really excited to talk about what we see as the key trends shaping nonprofit finance technology in 2026, specifically really through the lens of accounting technology and financial transformation. As we know, nonprofit finance leaders are operating in a very different environment than even just a few years ago. There's increased donor scrutiny, higher board expectations, tighter resources, and growing regulatory complexities. During today's session, we're going to share what we are seeing across the nonprofit finance technology landscape, what's changing, what's not working anymore, and how finance teams can really position themselves for the future. We're going to walk through key technology trends, why modern ERP matters more than ever, and provide some practical guidance that you can take back to your organizations, regardless of where you are on your technology journey. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here. And I think I'm struggling with that. Leo, will you see if you can advance for me? That is perfect. All right, awesome. Thank you. Before we dive into systems and solutions today, it's helpful to take a step back and look at what's really changing in the nonprofit finance as we head into 2026. The trends that we're going to share today really reflect what we are seeing every day in our work with nonprofit finance leaders. First thing I wanted to share is, as we know, there is more scrutiny than ever. From donors who want transparency, boards who expect timely and meaningful insight, and regulators who continue to add complexity, finance teams are being asked harder questions and expected to respond faster. And at the same time, as we know, teams are lean. Headcount isn't growing at the same pace as the expectations are, and finance leaders are being asked to deliver real-time insight with the same or fewer resources. And what this is doing is really driving a shift from finance as back office function to finance as a strategic partner. Leadership doesn't just want historical reports any longer. They want forward-looking insight that helps guide decisions. And the reality is that disconnected systems and spreadsheets can't support the level of insight nonprofits need today. The result from this is longer closes, inconsistent reporting, and growing uncertainty around the data. So the question becomes, what kind of technology foundation does finance really need to support the organization going forward into 2026 and beyond? Leo, will you go ahead and advance that slide for me? Perfect. Thank you so much. When we talk about ERP today and why it matters, we're not just talking about a general ledger or a system of record. What we're talking about is the foundation that everything else in the finance ecosystem is built on. Many nonprofits are still operating on legacy, on-premise, or entry-level systems that were never designed to support today's level of complexity, transparency, or speed. What worked 5 or 10 years ago and often can't keep up with the current expectations. Modern cloud ERP gives nonprofit organizations a purpose-built financial backbone, one that really supports dimensional accounting for programs, grants, and funding sources without relying on spreadsheets and workarounds. It also changes how finance supports leadership. Instead of static reports, delayed answers, finance teams can now provide real-time dashboards, insights that boards and executives can actually use to make real-time decisions. And so from a risk and control perspective, modern ERP improves audit readiness, compliance, really by creating consistency, transparency, and stronger controls across the organization. Ultimately, ERP solutions are not just about efficiency, it's about scalability. It gives your organizations the ability to grow your programs, grow your funding sources, and complexity without having to rebuild finance processes every few years. This is really why we are seeing so much momentum around ERP platforms that were designed specifically for nonprofits like Sage Intact, which is designed to scale alongside of your mission growth. The ERP system sets the foundation, but real value comes when it's surrounded by the right integrated systems. I'd like to now turn the time over to my colleague Leo, who's going to take us through what an integrated nonprofit technology ecosystem really looks like and why it matters. Leo?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So my name is Leo Gutierrez. I'm a manager here at GRF, manage our implementation team and our service delivery around Sage Intacct implementation support and customization services. And like Heather said, having the right ERP in place is great, but it's just the foundation, right? So the reality is your organization doesn't just use one system, right? It runs on many. You have your sorry, slide is being finicky. Here we go. You have your grant management and fundraising platforms. You have your payroll and CSM, your budget planning and reporting tools, and the list goes on, right? But the question is simple. Are these systems talking to each other? Or are you manually moving the data between the systems, right? Which results in a lot of errors and it's prone to user error, right? So can you trust that data when you're moving that around? That's where integration becomes critical. There's different methods for connecting and integrating your systems. Ideally, systems should connect directly through what we call APIs. If you think about it, it's like having a direct phone line with each of your systems so that they could talk to each other. Modern ERPs like Sage Intacct support this very well with open APIs that allow for best of breed integrations. Sage Intacct, which Heather alluded to earlier, has a robust marketplace of already built integrations that can connect to Sage Intacct. Your systems may be part of that marketplace, but not every system you use has that capability to connect through the API, but API connections are not the only way to connect to your system. Some of your systems have the ability of sending files or reports to what's called an SFTP site, which is a temporary holding container of that data, where an automation platform can then extract that file, transform the data that's found in it, and then load it properly into your ERP. Here's the point. Even when there isn't a direct API integration, those systems can be connected. Automated processes can be set up to move the data from one system to another on a schedule. There's no more manually downloading files, reformatting them in Excel, and uploading them somewhere else. There's another poll. If you don't see it, feel free to respond. So there's no need for all of that manual data manipulation. The goal is to eliminate your manual work, spreadsheets, and data silos so that the data moves automatically and consistently. Next slide. All right. So when your systems are integrated, you get the real payoff, which is having a single source of truth. The power isn't just saving time, it's about changing how your finance team operates. Today, if your executive director asks, can we afford to expand this program? You might spend days pulling data from all your different systems in order to answer that question. With a single source of truth, that answer comes faster and it's trusted. Your team stops spending time hunting for data and starts spending time analyzing it. That's the shift from being reactive to proactive, spotting trends earlier, identifying opportunities sooner, and catching problems before they become major issues. It also improves grant reporting accuracy because you're no longer stitching reports together from disconnected systems, and it's driving better collaboration between your finance, development, and operations teams because you're all working together from the same numbers. Your finance team moves from being data detectives to becoming true strategic advisors. Okay. So what should finance teams be prioritizing in 2026? I want to talk about four key areas. First, increase automation. So your month-end close processes, allocations, recurring entries, standard reports. If it's something that you're doing manually each month, it should be automated. Automation frees your team from repetitive work so that they can focus on analysis and strategy instead of manual processing. Second, embedded analytics. Your leadership shouldn't have to wait for a report. They should be able to log in and see real-time financial performance whenever they need it. Dashboards should be part of daily workflows so leaders can make proactive and informed decisions. Third, and this is coming faster than many people think, and it's been talked about in this presentation today, AI-enabled insights and anomaly detection. ERPs like Sage Intacct are already moving this direction. Systems can streamline the month-end close process, flag unusual spending patterns, which is what anomaly detection is, catch invoice issues before they post, and analyze budget variances in real time. Instead of discovering issues after month end, teams can identify them mid-month. The system actively helps you understand what the data is telling you. And fourth, building a finance technology roadmap that aligns with your mission growth. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What programs are you launching? What funding are you pursuing? Your technology stack needs to scale with those plans. So the key takeaway is this. The future isn't about having more systems. Mac Lillard mentioned earlier today that it's not about blindly implementing systems, but doing so strategically in a way that aligns with your mission. It's about making smarter systems, having smarter systems that work together, and technology that makes your team more effective, not just faster. So Heather, what are some practical ways that financial leaders can take action on the information we've shared today?
Awesome. Thanks, Leo. And that's a fantastic question. I'm happy to share my thoughts on that topic. So we know that transformation can be overwhelming. We work with clients on a daily basis to help them transform their financial and accounting systems. Our goal here in the Accounting Technology Services Department at GRF is to offer realistic, practical guidance. We look to meet organizations where they are, not where they think they should be. So some things I'd like to share is that when you're evaluating ERP platforms and the integrations that Leo was sharing, focus on the questions that matter most. Can the system scale with our programs and funding? Does it reduce manual work? Can leadership and the board easily get the insight they need? It's also important to recognize the warning signs that your current systems may be holding you back. So are our closes taking too long? Are we relying heavily on spreadsheets? Do we have difficulty producing grants and board reporting? Or is there a lack of confidence in the numbers that we're presenting? I'd also suggest that we think about transformation in phases. A successful transformation doesn't happen all at once. The most effective organizations plan transformation as a phase journey. We first prioritize high impact areas and then build momentum over time. It isn't about having the most advanced system on day one. It's really about focusing on what will deliver the greatest impact now while setting the foundation for what comes next. And then finally, choosing the right implementation and advisory partner matters. It matters just as much, if not more, than the right technology itself. Look for partners who understand nonprofit complexity and can help guide your organization through the change, not just configure the software. So while the right approach, technology becomes an enabler, helping nonprofit finance teams operate with more confidence, clarity, and strategic influence. And I'll wrap up our conversation today with just a few final notes. As we look ahead into 2026 and far beyond, one thing is very clear to us. Nonprofit finance is no longer just about closing the books. It's really about enabling the mission. Cloud ERP and integrated technology ecosystems, as Leo shared, like Sage Intacct, aren't just tools. They're the foundation that gives finance teams the clarity, confidence, and capacity to support growth, accountability, and the impact. So I would encourage all of you to think about where your systems may be holding you back today, where the right technology could help your finance team become even stronger and more strategic partners to the mission. I appreciate everyone's time today. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. As Leslie and Mark mentioned, all of our contact information will be provided. I look forward to speaking with you all. And I think we were right on time, if not a few seconds early. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Dick LaCastro and Lisa Heller.
Thank you, Heather and Leo, and thanks everyone. As my name's Lisa Heller, I'm here with Dick LoCastro, and we're here to present the next section of our session. As you probably know, every nonprofit development has a tax angle, and so Dick and I are here to go over just some latest thoughts on how to align your financial strategy with mission outcomes and help ensure that from a tax perspective and a donor perspective that we can help you move forward as best as possible in these uncertain times.
Thanks, Lisa. As Lisa and I like to say, 2025 was a lot, right? There was a lot going on there. There's lots of pressures, and the other speakers have talked about it. We've got changes in tax law, changes in the economic environment, changes in governmental funding, generational changes in who the donors or who the larger donors may be these days. And so, a couple of things that came across my desk as we're looking for these things: donor advised funds, which may or may not be a critical component to some of the folks as places of donations. $55 billion a year is what they contribute annually. Now, with the cuts in government funding, some large private foundations have increased their giving to organizations to help fill that gap, which may be temporary. We'll see how it goes. It may be more extended. We've got IRS turbulence. And what will that mean for organizations that are looking for guidance and looking for help on some of the questions that they're going to be facing? But really what it boils down to, and I know Mac talked about this and all the other speakers talked about this, is what we're going to focus on today is who are your donors, right? I know at the outset, I think Melissa talked about increased scrutiny from donors, regulators, and the public, competition for charitable dollars, which always exists, but I think we're feeling the pressure more now. Uncertain economic outlook, that's certainly one of those things. And then, what are our funding sources now and what are they going to be going forward? And if we're not thinking of that as part of our strategy, as part of our risk management, then I think we're missing things. So let's focus on who are our donors, what are we telling them, what should we be telling them, how do we tell them these things that they need to know, and some of that all depends on what the previous speakers talked about is how do we gather that information. And so Lisa and I are going to spend a little bit of time talking about that through the lens of our lens of tax and just the 990 and in general environmental things. But the first thing, and I want to turn it over to Lisa, is talking about some changes in the tax law and knowing how that may or may not impact your donor base.
Right. Thanks, Dick. I'll move forward the next slide. So on July 4th of 2025, yet another new tax law was signed into law. It's really just refining, in a lot of ways, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was enacted at the end of 2017. This latest one is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, often abbreviated as OBBBA or OB3. Many provisions running through OB3 with respect to charitable giving. Most of them have to do with individuals. There is a relevant one I'll talk about for corporate donors. I will start with the good news first. First of all, these provisions that I'm going to talk about are affected for the 2026 tax year, so the year we're in now. So those of you who are getting ready to prepare your 2025 tax returns that are due April 15th, tax filing season actually opened this past Monday, January 26th, for those of you who are so inclined to get it in early. These provisions are not affected for this year's round of tax returns, but next year's round of tax returns, they are absolutely affected. So these are things to keep in mind, not just for yourselves, of course, but these are provisions that could very well impact fundraising and the donors to your organization. So first, the good news. That's my long way of saying first the good news. There is a new deduction for people who do not itemize their deductions and instead take the standard deduction. The standard deduction has increased dramatically over the last few years, both for single and married filing jointly filers. And so fewer people than ever have been itemizing their deductions just because the standard deduction has been so generous. But one thing the standard deduction has not accounted for specifically is donations that individuals make to charity. It was all just rolled in to the standard deduction. But now, starting in 2026, there's a new, what we're going to call an above the line deduction for contributions of cash to public charity. So even if you're eligible to take the standard deduction, and most taxpayers are, you can still deduct an additional $1,000 with respect to charitable contributions made to charities if you're single, and if you're married filing jointly, that would be $2,000 for the two of you, and that's great. There was a similar provision during COVID, I believe, in the year 2020 or so. There was an above the line deduction like that, but it sunsetted fairly quickly. Now it's back, and it's more generous than ever. I just want to point out, though, that these are for cash contributions to what I'm going to call working charities. So if you have a donor advised fund or a private foundation that you like to donate to as your, charitable place of choice, this above the line deduction does not apply to those donations, only to the working charities whose names you know already. Next up, there is, and so now I'm going to kind of get into the bad news where it makes it a little bit less generous for individual donors. There's now what I'm going to call a new charitable floor for people who do itemize their deductions. Beforehand, there was a dollar for dollar reduction of your taxable income for charitable contributions made. Now, starting in 2026, contributions are only deductible to the extent that they exceed 0.5% of your adjusted gross income, or AGI for short. And I've given an example here for your reference. So if you're making charitable donations over the course of the year and you do itemize, if your AGI is, in this case, $400,000, first you have to donate at least $2,000 to be able to get any charitable deduction. So that is going to limit your opportunity to deduct charitable contributions in that way. I'm going to go to the next slide for a few additional key changes to charitable giving for next year, 2026. There, in addition to the AGI floor, now there's a deduction cap for people who are in the highest tax bracket, which remains at 37%. For those individuals, the charitable deduction is capped at the 35% effective rate, which means that if you are a high enough earner that your income is taxed at the higher rate of 37%, there's an additional haircut, unfortunately, that you'll have to take on your deductions that you can only deduct. Basically, it's only taxed a 35% tax rate on all of your charitable contributions. One piece of good news is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had increased the AGI limit for tax contributions. It used to be up to 50% of AGI. It was increased to 60% of AGI, and that was due to sunset during 2025. The OB3 provision made this 60% of AGI limitation permanent. So that's good news if you're philanthropic, if you tend to make a lot of charitable contributions, or if you make a lot of contributions in a single year, which some people have been doing to for tax planning purposes. So just know that now 60% of AGI for cash contributions to public charities is now permanent. There's also a slight tweak to corporate limits on charitable contributions that I want to point out. There has, for the longest time, been a 10% ceiling on a charitable contribution deduction for corporations. So, regardless of how philanthropic an organization or company is, only 10% can be deducted for 10% of taxable income can be deducted for charitable contributions, and then any remaining amounts can be carried forward for 5 years. That provision remains. But in addition, now there's a new 1% floor on deductible contributions, similar to that for individuals, but even less generous, because now the first 1% of charitable contributions that are made are no longer deductible. So now there is a floor and a ceiling going forward. So please keep these in mind. You may get some questions on these. I don't quite know how it's going to shake out in terms of how donors are going to donate to charitable organizations as a result. But to Dick's point, all the more reason, know your donors, know what motivates them, know what speaks to them, so that you can maximize your fundraising situation, especially in the face of these new provisions. And now I'm going to go to the next slide, if it will let me. All right, Dick, you're up.
Well, thanks again, Lisa. And yeah, to that point, one of the things to be mindful of as you're doing your budgeting and forecasting that some of the other speakers had talked about is, did we get a bump at year end because of the provisions that were coming in 2025 from corporations, from high net worth individuals? Were they bunching some of their contributions that they would have made in 2025 so that maybe 2025 may not be the yardstick by which you want to measure, your projected contributions going forward. So keep that in mind. So we say, okay, know your donor. I always say that whenever you complete a 990 or an annual report, every organization should have a constituency to whom they're speaking, right? And you need to know that. And it's not just the finance people, but, as the other speakers have talked about, the board knowing, being aligned in mission means everybody knows who we're speaking to, what our message is, and getting it out through a number of different things. So we're talking about the 990, which we'll talk about. It's not just the finance people that should be involved in this. We should have marketing, we should have development, we should have everybody involved in crafting and making sure it's consistent. So we want to talk first about the role of data in building trust. It's great to tell a story about an individual, right? We help this individual, and that's nice, and it pulls at your heartstrings, and you go, okay, that's great. But really, building a sustainable donor base that is aligned with your mission is understanding, hey, that's a great anecdote for one person, but know that it's a representation. How do we make that leap to say this is just one example of the thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that we've helped, and this is what it means to our community, to our state, to our country, to our environment, to the future. Understand, making that connection between a good story and then the data that backs it up and says, hey, this is the impact that we're having. And I think there's been a number of studies that have shown that some of the younger donors that are giving really want to see impact versus just a nice story. So data provides credibility and consistency, and you can measure things over years. But we do want to balance. This is not just a science, it's an art. We want to balance the quantitative with the human stories. And we want to turn our reports into narratives, not just, we don't want to just, I know we have another polling question that came up there. We don't want to just provide data, but we want to provide it in the context of something that's a meaningful narrative about what our mission is, how we're accomplishing it, what we've done, and what we're going to do. And I like the data around the donor questions that I would want to know. What changed? Who benefited? And why does it matter to me or to our community at large? And I think those are really important touch points for an organization to know. And as I mentioned, one of the ways we'll do this, we'll talk about part 3 of the 990 and part 9 of the 990. But and Lisa's going to talk a little bit about ways to convey that data in a way that's easy for somebody to digest and get the picture from a data standpoint.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah, this is a great this is a great tee off for the next slide here, where you want to make sure that you can use your data in a way to speak best to your donors and interested people and the public at large, because not just your Form 990, but also your website and other marketing sources. You've got opportunities to come up with all kinds of data, but then how do you translate that in a way to tell your story, in a way to connect with the people who you can relate to the most and who, your partners, as it were. So I've got a couple of examples here in a picture. Some people are visual. Yes, a question there was a polling question. So hopefully you answered that, even if you weren't looking, just to get CPE credit. But dashboards, scorecards, visuals. Again, know your audience, know your donor base to know what speaks to people best. People do like to see trends, over time. Who have you impacted? For how long? How long have these programs been going? How many people have you served in how many regions, how many countries? You're allowed to conduct your programs worldwide. That's absolutely fine, but it's good to let people know, not just individual anecdotes. Those are wonderful, of course, and can be quite fulfilling and heartwarming to report when you can help individuals. But how do these parlay into helping society as a whole? And what one person really can change the world, or certainly one person at a time. But the key is bridging that gap between the programs that you conduct day by day, and what does this mean for a greater purpose. I'm going to move things along in the interest of time. So then I also want to just Dick and I are going to talk a little bit about common pitfalls. Nobody wants a data dump, right? You're real excited about your mission. You want to tell everybody every little thing. Make sure that you're just a little bit careful that way to avoid overloading people with detail. And yeah, I just read that. I read that bullet point right there. Every organization has acronyms and their own jargon, their own language, so to speak. Make sure that when you're communicating your message externally, that people know what you're talking about, and you're not getting caught up in your own language. And of course, reporting your own, reporting what the impact is of your activities. Activities in themselves are going to cause the impact, but please do make sure that you can bridge that gap so that your story has the most impact to your
Yeah,
listeners.
Lisa, I like to say never confuse motion with action. Just because there's things moving around doesn't mean we're actually impacting anything. And so we want to make sure that, to your point, that we convey that in an appropriate way. And how do we convey that? Well, and this is where you really need, when we talk about being in alignment, not only internally by the board and the management and the deliverers of the service or the program, but on your website and the annual reports and your audited statements and your 990, making sure that they're all in alignment as to what our mission is and how we're accomplishing it. And I think that that's really important. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know we've got a few minutes left here
Right.
about what are the ways to do that on the 990, because that's the world that Lisa and I live in on the 990 is, as I mentioned at the outset, having a constituency to speak to on the 990. I'm going to talk about part 3. Lisa's going to talk about part 9. Part 3 is really important, where we get to show the narrative of what we do. So it's the mission statement, which is overall big picture. What's our mission statement? We want to make it meaningful but concise. And again, it's more art than science. The program narratives by expense, by the level of expense, and then anything above or below the top 3 would go on Schedule O. But Lisa and I were talking about this morning. Somebody may be looking at your 990 and evaluating you, like Mackenzie Scott did, I think, with some organizations, and giving very large grants without you ever knowing it. So pretend that somebody that you don't know is looking at it, and try and understand what impression will they draw from the 990, particularly part 3, which is not the only piece. But what would they think you are, and is that consistent with really who you think you are? So making sure your narratives align. And as I said, for using all the things that we talked about before, not using jargon, giving meaningful data without overwhelming them. So making sure those are all in alignment. And then there's the other piece of it that I think is really important that Lisa's going to talk about is part nine, which is our
Absolutely.
program expense allocation.
Yeah, what I like to say is that part three, the statement of program service accomplishments, is the PR section of Form 990, but part nine, the statement of functional expenses, is where the rubber hits the road. Because this is where the organization will actually show and demonstrate to IRS and whoever else is reading the Form 990 what you're doing with the money that you're spending. So statement of functional expenses breaks out an organization's expenses, not just by natural category, salary and occupancy and professional expenses and the rest, but also by program category. So it's broken out into program service versus management and general versus fundraising. And in that way, it's if you know what you're looking at, it really does provide a very good picture as to how the organization is using the funds and what exactly are their funds going to relative to running your organization. We have 1 minute left. One point that I just want to make is that a very high program service percentage may not be the way to go. It should accurately represent what you're doing to run your organization. You do need a robust enough back office management in general, as it were, to be able to support your programs to keep them running. Somebody's got to pay the rent. Someone's got to pay the phone bill and the internet bill, for example. Somebody's got to run payroll to make sure that your people are getting paid. Very often with nonprofit organizations, salary, compensation, and benefits are the highest expense. So you've got to keep that going, for example.
Yeah, and making
So
sure that that aligns with actually what you're doing and spending some time thinking about this stuff is important when you're audit and doing your 990.
absolutely. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for the next section here. So I'm just going to move us along real briefly to our conclusion. The slide pretty much says everything that Dick and I have gone through before. Dick, do you have anything else to add before we move on to John and Maya?
Nope, I want to make sure we get to them and thank you to all the previous speakers and looking forward to the fireside chat.
Thanks, Dick. And
Thanks,
now,
Lisa.
and here's our information if you'd like to reach us with additional questions. And now the moment that I know you've all been waiting for. I'm pleased to introduce Maya Ajmera, President and CEO of Society for Science and Executive Publisher of Science News. Before joining the Society, Maya founded and led for 18 years the Global Fund for Children, a nonprofit organization that invests in innovative community-based organization working with the world's most vulnerable children. Maya sits on multiple boards, is an award-winning children's book author, and a recipient of the National Science Board Public Service Award and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We're very fortunate to have Maya join us for today's fireside chat. And with that, take it away.
Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I will kick this off with Maya. My name is John Pace. I am a partner with GRF, and I've been with the firm for 21 years. I'm in charge of our outsourced accounting and advisory services group, and I'm so pleased to have Maya with us here today. And Maya, it's so nice to see you again, and thank you for being here to help us close out today's program. Before we dive into some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, it'd be helpful for everyone if you can ground us in your work. So could you briefly share what Society for Science does and what your mission is?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be at this event. I was just listening to the previous presentation, and I was taking furious notes, John.
Great.
So thank you for having me. I am president and CEO of the Society for Science and executive publisher of Science News. We were founded a little over 100 years ago by E.W. Scripps, the publishing magnate, and William Ritter. And Mr. Scripps was very concerned about what he was reading in newspapers about science. And so he created, as I say, the first leg of the stool, Science News Media Group, which is a 100-year-old magazine. Second leg of the stool is in the 1940s, our directors were very concerned about national security, and they were very concerned about who was going to be the next generation of talent to protect our country. So they created the Science Talent Search, which was Westinghouse for 50 years, then Intel, and now Regeneron Science Talent Search. We have the largest pre-collegiate STEM competition in the world, the International Science and Engineering Fair, and a middle school STEM competition called the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge. And then the third leg of the stool is we want to make sure every young person in this country can become a scientist or engineer if that's what they want to be when they grow up. So we have a number of STEM initiatives that reach millions of students and teachers across the country. So that's
Awesome.
who we are in a nutshell.
I love it. It sounds so appropriate for what we're facing today. And it's a perfect segue into our first topic, which is staffing and talent dynamics. And we've heard a lot about staffing today. Organizations across the country. We're in the DC area, but staffing, talent development, and talent dynamics are always top of mind for GRF and for our clients. And so. We've talked about that, but when you and I talked to prepare for this, you actually shared a slightly different perspective in the sense that, you're seeing a surplus of talent because of some of the things that have gone on in the last year with the government and contractors. And so can you tell us a little bit more about like what you're seeing and how that's had an impact?
Sure. So, look, talent is the most important piece of this work, right? And in the nonprofit sector, you are competing with those in the for-profit sector or even the government,
Right.
right? And so, and our salaries just can't compete, frankly. What we have seen at the Society for Science in the last year, and this is also true with some of our other colleagues, is we've seen so many resumes come in and also those of people who are sometimes overly qualified, or they're making a complete shift in their job thinking. So I'll give an example. We were looking for grant writers, science grant writers to write grant proposals for us. We had more PhDs apply because this next gen, they were not going to go forward with their postdocs or they were leaving NIH. That's to me very sad for a whole host of reasons because you want those folks to go into their fields of study, but if the jobs aren't there, they're starting to pivot. We've also seen quite a number of applicants in finance coming from government or the contracting agencies. So that's been interesting. It has been so hard to get good finance people in the last 5, 10 years, but somehow what's happened with layoffs. And then you've got to start looking at, I just read this morning that Amazon's laying off 16,000 people, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be looking, right?
Yeah.
And Amazon is right around the corner from us in Northern Virginia. It could be a good time for our sector to be looking for talent that's normally not coming from the same aisles.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and it sounds like that really poses a lot of opportunities, of course. And I know it hasn't been that long, but have you seen any kind of challenges related to that? The first thing that jumped in my head is like, is that PhD candidate kind of overqualified for some of those positions? And is that causing any tension within the organizations or seen anything like that?
So, when I think of the two that we hired, you know, they're at the beginning of their career.
Mhm.
Most of these PhDs, they're great writers and they know how to write about science. So that's a good thing for us. You can make those pivots, frankly. Are some overclocked? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To me, it's, we've seen the same thing. We've seen people with many years of experience apply for positions, and I think it's more about the person than it is the actual kind of just what the resume says, right? So,
Yeah.
I personally don't like to exclude someone just because on paper they might seem overqualified. I think we need to dig deeper.
I think you have to dig deeper. And what's happening with letting people go is that you could actually get someone very talented into your
Yeah,
institution.
absolutely.
And so I'm all about keeping an open mind.
Okay. Well, and we may have just touched on it, but in terms of like, what are some intangibles or factors beyond just credentials that, that sort of help you make a decision on whether to add someone to your team, whether they'll be successful in this nonprofit environment.
Well, one of the things for the Society for Science is being able to work quickly, think
Hmm.
quickly on your feet, be entrepreneurial, take initiative. I would say be entrepreneurial, take
Yeah.
initiative. Um, we are looking for excellent, excellent writers and communicators. And so you can be great on paper, but boy, coming in and being able to share your story and that storytelling component is really critical.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense and resonates with me, and I'm sure everyone listening today. So that was a great start on talent, and I know since we have limited time, there's a couple of topics we wanted to touch on, and I
Sure.
think maybe the second one we can jump to is this overall, and you can see there's a polling question that popped up for our participants, but this overall concept of financial literacy and internal communication about financial matters within the nonprofit. Um, when we talked, you were pretty candid and said, hey, this is something that we're still working on as an organization. And I think many of our clients are in the same boat. So at Society for Science, what does financial literacy look like, especially between finance and yourself and department heads and things like that?
So let me be very transparent here. I think of the finance team providing a service to those that are on the front lines of providing the programs.
Right.
And you need to have a pulse of what your expenditures are. And we do this on a monthly basis. Okay.
Mhm.
I also write board reports to my board on a monthly basis where I provide our financial statements. So that's one thing. The second is our chiefs, our senior team, the chief program officer, the chief communications officer, chief advancement officer, they all receive their monthly expenditure reports. The things that get gnarly for us is making sure we're spending our restricted grants in a timely manner.
Okay. Yeah.
And that is for every nonprofit leader
Agree.
and sector. We get a lot of restricted money, right? We would all love to get unrestricted capital, right? But that's just
Right.
not the way our sector works, right?
Right.
And so that is something we have to keep a real pulse on constantly. Because what you don't want to see happen is our fiscal year ends at the end of December. In November, you have all this money that you didn't expend or you thought you expend. So that communication is so clear.
Yeah.
It needs to be incredibly clear between the finance team and the other folks that are actually spending the money. I will also tell you, I speak to two people. The two people I speak to the most
Hmm.
is my CFO
Okay.
and my chief advancement officer. Money coming in, money going out.
Okay. Yeah. That's super smart and makes a lot of sense. And we were gonna the one of the points I was gonna bring up is where can this communication break down and where this whole process can break down. But I think you kind of identified it potentially, if you're not consistently and accurately reporting on those restricted grants and funding, it's not going to be a fun time.
No, it's
And
not. And we take that very seriously. And we have that down to a real mechanism now, but we're still learning, right? The
yeah,
other piece is how do we use technology and AI in finance
yeah.
to make our work more efficient? And that is something we're really looking into, and something I hope we can learn from GRF as you
Yeah.
start delving into AI tools. How does that help us be more efficient in our work?
Yeah, that in of itself is just a great topic, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of that, even personally and as a firm. The future's it's something that's very exciting to me, and we have fun with using AI to help further our goals and our clients' goals. So I think the future is bright as far as that goes. Um, Interestingly, so it sounds like you know your organization, you've got great communication. Sounds like you've got great people. You've got good processes in place. No one's perfect. There's always room for learning and growth. So it's true of all organizations. But as you and you've so you've clearly done a lot. So as your organization continues to grow and get more complex, do you see any of the financial concepts that are kind of more difficult for your department heads and program managers to kind of grasp, or are there areas where you need more like kind of information training outreach?
So we are a complex organization. We're about 40 million plus,
Yeah.
but our revenue streams come from a lot of different places. We have a media company that has subscriptions, advertising, licensing. We have grants that are unrestricted and restricted. We have 10,000 plus individual donors,
Mhm.
right? From $10 donors to six-figure, seven-figure gifts. Um, so managing that, and sponsorships, okay?
Right.
That's a whole nother thing. So managing that and its complexities, I think is a constant, you have to keep people. I'm very, very lucky. Like we've had some folks on our finance that have been with us for quite some time. So they understand the ins and outs of our processes. The
Yeah.
other is our senior team have been in their places for quite some time. So we've really, really, and I think I consider ourselves a learning organization that we're constantly learning. And John, I want to go back to the AI piece.
Sure.
I'm very interested in how AI is going to help with finance. That's
Yeah.
one thing that we still haven't gotten our uh, minds around.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely more to come on that, and it's definitely exciting to me. I mean, at one point, I think when this, AI came out, and it's only been a few years. I was
Yeah.
sitting at a conference when Chat GPT basically came out, and it was astounding what it could do. I think that was 2019 or 2020, something like that. Maybe not
Yeah.
even that far back. But I think there was this initial fear that maybe, jobs would be eliminated and stuff. But from what we can see so far, I feel like it's just going to make us more powerful in our
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah.
So we will definitely be excited to share some of the ways that we're using that technology with you and our clients. But you gave us a perfect segue as well, because you talked about the complexity and that there's so many things going on with your organization. It's like I can see that happening, and I can see every day brings new challenges that maybe you didn't even expect. But one of the key things that you said that's the perfect segue into the next topic is established leaders, established team members, trusted team members that you have. I was almost going to say the luxury of, but I don't know that it's a luxury because I believe you've worked hard to make it happen. You've earned that. And so, the topic is then succession planning and leadership continuity. And, when we were chatting during our planning conversation, one of the things that you said that really stood out to me was, you know, we joked about whether it's get hit by a bus or win the lottery, and we all decided that it's better to say, if I win the lottery, and you said, when you win the lottery, the society will be just fine there without you. Can you tell us about that and what intentional kind of work sits behind that level of confidence that
Sure.
you have?
So when I came in 12 years ago, I basically started thinking about that, right? After the
Yeah,
first year. And one of the things we've done is build capacity across our senior team. But one is having our COO. Our COO started as a director of development and then chief of staff and now COO. And, is in step, right? With so if
yeah,
something happened, I will also say my executive assistant is pretty powerful.
yeah,
Would work with the board it just knows what to do, right? Of
yeah,
things that need to happen. I will also say we have had the things that have kept me up at nights. We've have a senior team, many that have been in their positions from 10 to 30 years.
hmm
I'm I'm thinking about when they win the lottery,
Right.
who will take their positions,
Right.
right? And that's
Hmm.
really important. And so we're building this next level of leadership in the organization that we call directors, that we actually know that if someone won the lottery, they could actually probably they could step in and there would be no issue.
Yeah, it's
But you
interesting,
have to have, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but you
you're fine.
have to have the luxury of resources to be able to do that
Yeah.
in a way that smaller nonprofits do not. That just,
Yeah.
and that, I mean, that's hard.
Yeah, and the point really resonates because in some ways, one might not think a nonprofit and a CPA firm are similar, but in the ways of leadership and the ways that we have built this firm, there's so very similar, so many similarities, and one of the things that I don't think that you can be where you are today with these leaders and the continuity that you have and the trust that you have without the trust that you've placed in these people that they can step up. You trust them, you can let go, you can leverage. Is leverage and just kind of letting go of overall control and letting them fly, is that part of your strategy in terms of your team?
Um, for me, so I'll be honest, I meet with each one of my senior leaders every week for
Yeah,
15 minutes to a half hour. And if there's
yeah,
nothing to talk about, we just chit chat.
yeah,
Say
yeah,
the sun is bright. It's incredibly freakishly cold, but or we have there's agenda items that come through, and we can make decisions really quickly if they need my decision making. Sometimes it's just asking advice, right?
right,
It's an HR question, or it's what do we think about the strategy, Maya? And it's also about trust. Look, you hire really, I have this motto, you hire really smart people to surround you. And many of
yeah,
the folks are much smarter than I am. My
yeah.
chief communications officer, she'll say, we can't say that. I'm like, okay. Like, like, you can't
Yeah,
say that to the press. Like, I'm like, okay, because has more expertise, right?
right,
I don't question Ed Maxwell, our CFO, and in terms of showing overhead percentages, right? He's like, no,
yeah.
this is what it is. This is how we do it. I'm like, okay, like, I ask questions, but they are much smarter than I am.
Well, and it's so funny again. Here we align when we interview and we bring people on. One of the things that I say all the time is, we're in the business of collecting smart people and collecting brains. And when we bring you on, we don't want you to stay silent. We want your ideas. That's why we're hiring you, right? So, we want to empower folks that maybe haven't been empowered before, and just give them the confidence, because we're certainly greater together. There's no doubt. So. Yeah, I think it's interesting how much the leadership styles and teams can be similar between two pretty different organizations. But and you're right, it's very cold out there. I wish we actually had a fire here. That would be nice. So this has been great. I know this time we knew it was going to fly by. I think we have 3 minutes left. I'm not sure if we're supposed to have time for any questions, but. Um, I guess what I should say is thank you for your candor and your leadership and helping us today. And I guess we can try to say, maybe as a last question for you, if you have one leadership mindset or habit that's helped you the most, would you be willing to share that nugget? It's a tough one.
Sure. I don't know if it's a leadership mindset, but I tend to stay away from people who suck the passion out of me.
Wow.
And I tell that to everyone, like, stay away from them.
Yeah,
Have people who challenge you, but don't have people who constantly are saying no to you.
yeah,
And I'm one of those people I'm a social entrepreneur. I founded Global Fund for Children. We've built new programs here at the Society for Science. And I am about, let's try things, let's experiment. If it doesn't work, stop, move on.
yeah.
But we won't know until we try.
I,
And
I
so
can't tell you how much I love that. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just end with that. Like that's
Yeah,
just where I come from, and I love it when my team members come up with a new idea and say, "Can we try this?" Like, yeah, go for it. What
go
sort of
for it.
resources do you need? And our board of trustees have taken some risks with us, and
Yeah,
I am deeply grateful to them. But it's based on trust. It's based on knowing our limitations, and it's based on knowing that we've had some big wins. But we've also
yeah.
learned from some things that have not worked out, and we've had to pull back.
Yeah, I was going to add, but I don't think I can say it any better than you did. So, I think that's just a fantastic way to wrap up our program. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? So, trust your people, hire good people. So awesome, awesome leadership values. And again, we thank you so much for your time today. I don't know if someone from GRF is coming in to wrap up the program, but if not, thank you to
John,
everybody. Oh, go ahead.
thank
Sorry.
you. Thank
Thank
you to
you.
this group. Thank you to Lisa and John and to GRF. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Stay warm.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, John and Maya, for the wonderful chat. If you're looking for more conversations like this, I encourage you to go to our podcast, GRF on the Go. And we are really at time. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's discussion. We encourage you to follow us on social media at GRF CPAs and visit our website for all the upcoming events and alerts. Please remember to complete your surveys that will automatically appear following the session if you'd like to earn CPE credit. But thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.